Of every fighter the Royal Air Force has ever put into the sky, from the Spitfire to the Typhoon, not one of them died losing a fight. They all died for the same reason. Something better came along, and by the end of this, you're going to see something almost nobody notices. 2 names on this list. 2 of them vanish for decades and then come back in aircraft that share nothing but the word painted on the side. The RAF's line of fighters closes back on itself, and I'm going to show you exactly how. I went through more than 80 years of service, every model, every rival, every combat record, to pull all of it into one place. Because we tend to think a fighter goes obsolete when the enemy builds a better one, but the truth is more uncomfortable. Almost every time, the weapon that killed each of these fighters was built by the British themselves. This is the story of a country that kept outbuilding its own legends again and again. Ask anyone which aircraft won the Battle of Britain, and you'll hear one name: the Spitfire. But the fighter that shot down the most German aircraft that summer wasn't the Spitfire. In the summer of 1940, Britain stood alone. Hitler had taken France, and Operation Sea Lion, the German plan to cross the Channel and invade, hung on one thing: control of the sky. The Luftwaffe massed around 4,000 aircraft. RAF Fighter Command had about 1,700 to stop them. The RAF's answer came in 2 shapes. The first was the Hawker Hurricane, built the old way. A frame of steel tubing wrapped in doped fabric, like canvas stretched over a skeleton. That made it rugged, cheap, and fast to repair. Britain built over 14,000 of them. On paper, it was slower, about 340 miles an hour, and it looked the part. Thick body, a broad, straight wing. So the RAF handed it the job that suited it. Hunt the bombers, the Heinkels, the Dorniers, the Junkers carrying the bombs meant for London. The second was the Supermarine Spitfire. All metal, narrow, elegant, a greyhound next to the Hurricane's workhorse. Its elliptical wing, that unmistakable oval shape, let it turn and climb with the best fighter Germany had, the Messerschmitt Bf 109E. The Spitfire was faster, around 360 miles an hour, so it drew the harder task: take on the enemy fighters and keep them off the Hurricanes. 2 aircraft, 1 machine. And here the legend gets rewritten. The Spitfire got the fame, but the Hurricane did the killing. Aviation historian John Alcorn's study of the battle credits Hurricanes, with the majority of RAF victories, widely cited somewhere between 55% and 60% of every German aircraft brought down. The faster, prettier Spitfire accounted for fewer. The unglamorous Hurricane was the backbone of the whole defense. The cost was human. 544 RAF aircrew were killed in those 4 months. The pilots, many barely 20 years old, some with only a few hours on type before they were thrown into the fight, became known simply as the FUDU. On the 20th of August, with the battle still raging, Winston Churchill rose in the House of Commons and gave them the line that outlived them all. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. Britain held. Sea Lion was shelved. But victory hid a warning. The Hurricane's fabric and tube body had already hit its ceiling. It could not chase the faster 109s coming next, and within 2 years it was pulled from the front line and turned into a ground attack hurry bomber. The Spitfire went the other way. It was never truly replaced. It was reinvented, mark after mark, 24 versions in all, until the late war Mark 14 swapped its engine for a Griffon nearly twice as powerful. Piston power was climbing toward its limit, and Hawker was about to build the fastest propeller fighters Britain ever flew. One of them carried a name that would disappear for 60 years and then come back. With the battle won, Britain stopped defending and started attacking. To carry the war into occupied Europe, it needed something the Hurricane and Spitfire were not: a heavy fighter, fast down low, able to smash whatever sat on the ground. First, the ones left behind. The Gloucester Gladiator, the RAF's last biplane fighter, was already a relic in 1940. 2 wings and a past that stood no chance against German monoplanes. And the Boulton-Paul Defiant, the fighter built around a design mistake, had no forward guns, only a rear turret. The first time out, it worked by surprise when German pilots mistook it for a Hurricane and attacked from behind, right where its guns were aimed. Once the Germans learned the trick, the Defiant became a death trap and was pushed into night fighting. Neither was the future. Hawker was. The future arrived as the Hawker Typhoon. It was born in 1941 as an interceptor, meant to replace the Hurricane and answer a new problem: the German Focke-Wulf 190, which was beating the Spitfires of the day. But the Typhoon failed at its job. Up high, it was clumsy, dragged down by a thick wing. Worse, the tail came apart in mid-air, and carbon monoxide leaked into the cockpit, a fault never fully cured. Early on, more Typhoon pilots died from the machine than from the enemy. And yet, down low, that same thick wing made it a brutal platform. So the RAF stopped asking it to be an interceptor and rebuilt it as a fighter bomber. After D-Day, Typhoon squadrons fell on German tank columns and trains with 60-pound rockets. Wartime propaganda credited them with hundreds of tanks destroyed. Modern historians are colder. Historian Chris Bishop found those rockets were largely ineffective against heavy armor, and that far more tanks were claimed than were ever actually knocked out. The real effect was psychological. German crews abandoned their vehicles the moment they heard Typhoons coming. Over 3,000 were built. Its thick wing was the problem, so Hawker gave it a new, thinner one, and out came the Hawker Tempest. Same power, but now genuinely fast, around 430 miles an hour down low, one of the fastest propeller fighters the RAF ever flew. And it arrived just in time for the strangest threat of the war. In June 1944, Germany began launching the 5-1, a pilotless flying bomb, a jet engine with wings and a warhead aimed at London. More than 9,000 were launched. Around 2,500 reached the city and killed roughly 6,000 people. The Tempest was one of the few aircraft fast enough to catch them, and its squadrons became the best at it, credited with most of the V-1s brought down by fighters, some 638 in a matter of months. But shooting down a V-1 had a deadly catch. Hit it close, and the blast took you with it. So the best pilots learned to fly alongside the bomb, slide a wingtip under its wing, and flip it, tipping its gyroscope and sending it diving into an empty field, downing a missile without firing a shot. This was the piston fighter at its peak. It was also its end. While the Tempest chased flying bombs over Kent, an aircraft with no propeller was already entering service in the same RAF. The jet age had begun. That jet was the Gloucester Meteor. 2 engines, one in each wing, at a time when almost everything flying still had a propeller. It entered service in July 1944, and became the only Allied jet fighter to see combat in the Second World War. Germany had its own jet, the Me-262, faster and more advanced, but the 262 was on the other side. On the Allied side, the Meteor was alone. For the pilots who flew it, the change was total. No propeller clawing at the air ahead of them, just a smooth, strange rush of thrust and a whole new way of dying if they got it wrong. Its first job was not against fighters, but against the same V-1S the Tempest hunted. And here the story rhymes. The early Meteor's cannons jammed constantly, so when the guns failed, pilots used the same trick, edging a wingtip up to the bomb and toppling it with the air pressure. The most modern aircraft in the world, downing missiles with an acrobat's move. 616 Squadron claimed 13 or 14 V-1S that way. The Meteor looked like the future, but it hid two problems. The first was its shape, a straight, fairly thick wing that had a ceiling. Near the speed of sound, the air fought back, and the aircraft could not push past it. The second was darker. The Meteor killed its own. The jump from piston to jet was so abrupt that accidents soared. In 1952 alone, around 150 were lost, and across its life hundreds of pilots died in accidents, many in training. Men who had survived the war died in peacetime learning to fly the jet. Nearly 4,000 were built. If the Meteor was the cautious jet, the next was the bold bet. The de Havilland Vampire had a single engine and a strange silhouette, twin slim booms holding the tail, with a short, stubby central pod for pilot and engine. It looked like an aircraft cut in half, but it worked, and it set records. In 1948, it became the first RAF jet to cross the Atlantic, though in stages, not one hop. And before that, it had done something harder still. In December 1945, flown by the legendary Eric Winkle Brown, a Vampire landed on the carrier HMS Ocean, the first pure jet aircraft to operate from a carrier deck. The Vampire was Cold War, not World War. By the time it matured, the Luftwaffe was gone, and the new rival lay east, the Soviet Union. From it came a sharper version, the de Havilland Venom, thinner wing and more thrust, which saw real combat in the 1956 Suez Crisis and the jungles of Malaya. But it was an improvement on a base that was already dated. Because the Meteor and the Vampire shared the same birth defect. Both had straight wings, and the straight wing was a wall. Neither could break the sound barrier. Across the planet, in American deserts and Soviet design offices, the answer was already being drawn, a wing swept back into an arrow. The RAF had reached the jet age early. Now it had to learn to fly faster than sound, and it was running late. By the mid-50s, a problem appeared that neither the Meteor nor the Vampire could solve, and it came from very high up. The threat was the Soviet nuclear bomber. Machines like the Tu-16 and the huge Tu-95 Bear could cross the North Sea at 16 or 17,000 meters at night in any weather, carrying a single bomb able to erase a city. The reaction window was almost nothing. The RAF needed an aircraft that climbed fast, saw in the dark, and struck first. Its answer was the ugliest fighter it ever fielded. The Gloucester Javelin was big, heavy, and arrow-shaped, a triangular delta wing and a tall tail, crewed by 2 men, a pilot, and a radar operator. It was the RAF's first purpose-built all-weather interceptor made for one mission, hunting bombers at night. On paper, it fit. In practice, it hid a killer. The Delta design had an aerodynamic trap called the super stall. Lift the nose too far, and the aircraft dropped into a deep stall it almost couldn't escape, falling flat like a leaf, ignoring the controls. Several test pilots died finding that edge. The Javelin never shot down a single enemy in its whole career. Its only real operations were patrols over Borneo in the 60s, without a shot fired in anger. The price of this aircraft wasn't paid by the enemy. It was paid by the British, who tamed it. 424 were built. If the Javelin was the price in blood, the next was the reward. The Hawker Hunter was everything the Javelin wasn't. Slim, clean, with a swept wing that drew a beautiful line against the sky. Pilots adored it. It was the aircraft everyone dreamed of flying, so graceful that the RAF's aerobatic team, the Black Arrows, once looped 22 Hunters in tight formation, a record still remembered. And it was fast. In September 1953, test pilot Neville Duke took a Hunter prototype to a world speed record for the time, 727 miles an hour over the Sussex coast. And yet, even the elegant Hunter had a hidden flaw, and it was almost comic. The early models firing their cannons at high altitude cut out. The gases from the gun muzzles choked the engine's air intake and made it stall. Britain's most beloved fighter, the sky's leading man, risked falling silent at the very moment it opened fire. It took time to fix. But beneath the Hunter's elegance and the Javelin's functional ugliness lay an uncomfortable truth that bound them together. Neither was truly supersonic. The Hunter only passed the sound barrier in a dive. In level flight, never. The Javelin, the same. And meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States had already fielded the F-100 Super Sabre, a fighter that broke the sound barrier in straight, level flight, no tricks. The Soviet Union was going the same way. The RAF's two best fighters, its most beloved classics, had ended up a rung below the speed the decade already demanded. Britain knew it, and in some hangar the answer was already taking shape. An aircraft so extreme, so brutally fast, that the Hunter would look like another era beside it. An interceptor that climbed almost vertically and crossed Mach 2. The problem is that this monster would be born with a flaw that doomed it almost from the first flight. Britain was building an aircraft that barely looked like one. It looked like a missile with a cockpit, and it answered everything the Hunter and the Javelin couldn't, while carrying a flaw so serious it would haunt it to the end. That aircraft was the English Electric Lightning. To see how strange it was, look at its two engines. They didn't sit side by side like every other fighter, but one on top of the other, stacked inside the fuselage. That gave it enormous thrust in a narrow body. The result didn't fly. It launched. It hit Mach 2, more than twice the speed of sound, around 1,450 miles an hour. And it climbed like nothing British before it, about 20,000 feet a minute, almost vertical, as if someone had strapped a seat to a rocket and lit it. Pilots said it was the closest thing to flying a manned missile. Its official ceiling was around 56,000 feet. But that was the paper figure. In real exercises, Lightning pilots threw it into a full-power zoom climb and took it far higher, high enough to intercept U-2 spy planes at altitudes they had no business reaching. Nothing else in the West climbed like it. But here is the villain of this story, and it's the aircraft itself. All that thrust drank fuel at a terrifying rate. The Lightning's endurance was absurd. A full sortie barely passed the hour, and if the pilot used the afterburner, which is what it needed to do everything spectacular it could do, that time collapsed. The fastest climbing fighter in Europe was also one that could barely leave home. It could catch anything. It just couldn't chase it far. Every mission was a race against the fuel gauge, and still the British loved it like no other. Because the Lightning was the last of a bloodline, the only supersonic fighter designed and built entirely in Britain to reach production. The last all-British fighter. 378 were built, and it served all the way to 1988, decades longer than planned, because its successor was late and nobody wanted to retire it. The trouble was that the world had changed, and not in Britain's favor. In 1957, a defense paper signed by Minister Duncan Sandys declared that the future of air warfare was missiles, and that manned fighters were finished. It was one of the most ruinous decisions in British aviation history, strangling the development of new homegrown fighters for years. So when the RAF needed an aircraft that could do everything the Lightning couldn't, it no longer had the industry to build it. It had to buy one abroad, and it bought American. The choice was the McDonnell Douglas Phantom, a heavy two-seater that did everything: intercept, attack, photograph. The opposite of the specialist Lightning. But the British couldn't just buy it as it was. They decided to improve it with British engines, the Rolls-Royce Spey, instead of the American ones. And here comes the most cited irony of the whole program. The Spey gave more thrust down low and better initial acceleration. But to fit it, the fuselage had to be widened, and that fatter body made more drag. The result, by Britain's own analysis, was that the British Phantom was, at altitude, slower than the standard American Phantom it was meant to beat. More expensive and slower up high. Britain had paid extra to partly worsen an aircraft that was already excellent. Even so, the Phantom did the job for over 20 years, guarding the skies of Britain and West Germany until 1992. By then, another aircraft was relieving it, one Britain had neither built alone nor bought ready-made, but manufactured together with its European neighbors. Because the age of the purely British fighter had ended with the Lightning, what came next would fly 3 flags, not 1. The first proof of that was the Panavia Tornado F3, an interceptor built jointly by Britain, Germany, and Italy. Its wing was unlike anything before: variable geometry, able to sweep back in flight for speed and open out to fly slow and far. And that far was the point. The Tornado could patrol for hours over the North Sea, waiting for Soviet bombers with long-range missiles. It had exactly what the Lightning lacked its whole life: endurance. But it arrived with an almost comic fault. The radar it was meant to carry, the Fox Hunter, was so delayed that the first Tornado F3s entered service without it. And because the nose needed weight to fly balanced, they fitted a block of concrete in the tip where the radar should have gone. Pilots nicknamed it Blue Circle, after a British cement brand. The RAF's most modern interceptor flew, literally, with a lump of building material in its nose. It served until 2011. Its replacement closes this story and closes the circle we opened at the start. The Eurofighter Typhoon entered service in 2003, built by 4 nations: Britain, Germany, Italy, and Spain, none of which could still afford to build a frontline fighter alone. It is a multirole air superiority fighter with an unmistakable shape, a delta wing, and 2 small forward canards. It has fought over Libya, patrolled the Baltic, and flown against the Islamic State. And today its daily job is to scramble and intercept the Russian Tu-95 Bear bombers that probe British airspace. Exactly the same mission the Lightning flew half a century earlier. Same enemy, same sea, different aircraft. And here is what I promised at the start. 2 names on this list vanished for decades and came back. The first is Typhoon. It was used first on that piston fighter bomber of 1941, the one that reinvented itself smashing tanks in Normandy, and it returned 60 years later on this 4th-generation fighter that shares not one bolt with it. The second is Lightning. The name of the all-British rocket interceptor of 1959, the one with the impossible fuel, flies today painted on the side of the Royal Air Force's most modern jet, the F-35, which the service officially named Lightning. And the pattern has not stopped. The fighter that will one day replace the Typhoon is already being built with Japan and Italy, and its British name is Tempest, the same as that propeller fighter bomber of 1944. 3 dead names, 3 resurrections. The Royal Air Force began with fighters that came from a single British factory and a single mind. It ended with machines assembled between nations, resurrecting the names of their grandfathers: the Spitfire, the Hurricane, the Meteor, the Hunter, the Lightning. Not one fell in combat. They were all killed by the same thing. Something better. Almost always built at home. Notice something that stayed in the shadows this whole time. Every one of these fighters was born for the same purpose, to bring down a bomber. The Heinkels over London in 1940. The Tu-95 Bears over the North Sea through the Cold War. The same bears the Typhoon scrambles to intercept today. The bomber was the silent enemy of this entire story. But Britain did not only hunt bombers, it built its own. And some of them carried a power no fighter on this list ever touched, the ability to wipe out an entire city in a single flight. That's the other half of the story. The half that carried the bombs instead of chasing them. Go watch them all now.